Hi everyone, welcome back to In Too Deep, a podcast with me, Alyssa. In this podcast, we go a little too deep into everything feminism, from Sabrina Carpenter's album cover to incest in America. Yeah, it's a bit of a weird episode, but I promise they relate somehow. I'm back. I was gone for a while. As I said in my last episode, which was like 2 months ago, I was going on holiday and then I was moving cities. So I have now done both of those things. Thank you. So I am no longer living in Perth, Western Australia, which I don't even know if I ever talked about that on here, so maybe you guys didn't even know anyway. But I no longer live there. So anyway, in the past, like a few weeks, I think I have received many comments that have said something along the lines of, it's not that deep. Guys, look at my podcast name. Look at the title. Yeah, we're going in too deep anyway, even if it's not that deep. I'm doing it anyway. So by the episode title and by my introduction, you can probably ascertain that this episode is somewhat inspired by the discourse surrounding Sabrina Carpenter's album cover, which I didn't want to talk about, but then something happened and now I have to talk about it. Her album cover, Female Sexuality, and also Choice Feminism, of which I've talked about both like extensively, but people still aren't getting it, so I have to keep talking about it. Actually, as I said, I refuse to discuss her album cover, also because that discourse has come and passed. I don't need to talk about it anymore. You can like look at my TikTok if you're unaware. But also, I don't think anyone is unaware at this point. It was literally my entire For You page. Like, I actually couldn't escape it. But what connects her to this episode is her recent post. I don't even know how recent it was when this will like go up, but it was about her alternate album covers for like the vinyl release, and they were supposedly approved by God. Also, the album covers were again her next to a man who's surprised. But also with that comment alongside it, she was again insinuating that any of the valid feminist critique against her was actually just religious conservatism. Who's surprised? The argument about like male-centeredness, which if you have one brain cell, at the minimum, one brain cell, you would be able to tell that if her whole brand is about hating men, then that's called being obsessed with men, not feminism. Actually, feminism doesn't have anything to do with hating men at all. So regarding all the comments I received that were like, have you ever listened to one of her songs? Like, they're all about hating men. What do you mean? Also, like, she doesn't have a single song about hating men. Like, I'm so confused. They're all like, oh my God, I hate you, but like, yeah, I'll date you anyway. Like, that's, okay, so she doesn't hate him. Guys, she doesn't hate them, and even if she did, that's still not feminism. So, but anyway, that's also not really a focus. I just had to talk about it. What really irked me with these new album covers is that they reference a picture of Marilyn Monroe. Now, Sabrina Carpenter has already been like widely criticized for her whole, I'm like a little child and hairless, but I'm also like Lolita, but I'm also like sexually liberated. I don't think any of those words should go together. But to reference Marilyn Monroe adds like a whole other layer to this, and it connects so many other ideas to this as well. So unfortunately, I am talking about her a lot in this episode actually, even though I didn't want to. But she's like the perfect case study for what I want to discuss. Sabrina's brand is like voluntarily sexualized. Of course, sex sells, but to voluntarily utilize the forced sexuality of women, specifically of a woman who killed herself after being sexualized her entire life, like not really consensually, is extremely tone deaf. And I don't know, to voluntarily market yourself in the same way of a woman who literally didn't have a choice, and we're going to get more into that too, but it's just like insensitive at the minimum. It's not an argument over whether it's anti-feminist, it's an argument over whether she cares about women in the slightest, and the sexual violence that has been inflicted against us for like centuries. Before we even really get into the like everything I need to talk about in this episode, I have a quote from Andrea Dworkin to quote to you. It's from her book Right Wing Women, which I actually finished reading recently. It's probably her best work, I think. I also just bought Women Hating, and I'm gonna buy all three of her like newly released Penguin modern classics. I think that's what they're called. But I will be like quoting that book quite a few times in this episode because it kind of relates to the whole idea itself and the idea of why women turn to right-wing politics. Even if they're like supposedly liberal, they're still partaking in right-wing politics a lot of the time, especially when you're discussing Sabrina Carpenter, whose whole aesthetic these days is like 1950s housewife. So Andrea Dworkin said, "Women have found the development and exercise of sexual intelligence more difficult than any other kind. Women have learned to read, women have acquired intellect, women have had so much creative intelligence that even despisal and isolation and punishment have not been able to squeeze it out of them. Women have struggled for a moral intelligence that by its very existence repudiates moralism. But sexual intelligence is cut off at its roots because the woman's body is not her own. The fact that the sexuality of the female is predetermined and that she is forced to be what men say she is murders sexual intelligence. Men have constructed female sexuality and in doing so have annihilated the change for sexual intelligence." And I think the idea of sexual intelligence, which we're going to go into a bit later as well, is one of the main things that I feel like when you're discussing feminism and the difference between how like different strands of feminism kind of interact and disagree and things like that, it oftentimes falls into their opinions on how female sexuality is, how it exists in society, and generally just like an understanding of the culture around them. And I think a lot of liberal feminists have a big misunderstanding of this culture, I guess. And I think that's similar to something that Gail Dines said as well. How if you're like saying things along the lines of like, let women be submissive, and arguing for the existence and even the advertisement of like pornified tropes, it's like a complete misunderstanding of the culture. And in doing any of those things, you are like going against women as a class, as a group of people. And that is what Andrea Dworkin means as well when she discusses why women turn to right-wing politics. First, we're going to talk about Marilyn Monroe and Hugh Hefner. In The Case Against the Sexual Revolution by Louise Perry, she discusses the sexual liberation movement. Would like to preface this by saying I didn't really like the book. I only liked like the start of it when she was discussing particularly like Playboy, Marilyn Monroe, and like some other sex icons of the time as well. Actually, I would say my main criticism is that it was like really bioessentialist, like really. She discussed the biological nature of why men rape, which perhaps like the biological nature of it would make sense or be relevant if we lived in like tribes and huts, but we don't. So I think it was like a complete disregard for the socialized aspects of why men rape. Perhaps there's like some biological nature. I'm not really saying there isn't, but I don't think it comes into play when how we're socialized kind of just like completely goes against biology in itself. So I just don't think it matters that much. Perry does give a great explanation of the actual truth behind Playboy magazine and sex icon women during the mid-1900s, who were always seen as like supposedly liberated or always desiring sex and just that being who they were. Hefner and Marilyn Monroe never actually met. But as is common knowledge, Hefner purchased the spot next to Monroe in the cemetery she was buried in without her say because she was dead. And then 25 years later, he would be buried next to her. Earlier in 1953, he had published her nude photo shoot, again without her consent, as a centerfold in the first edition of Playboy magazine. It was without her consent, but it was also without any compensation, monetary or otherwise. Like, he just published it and like didn't even tell her, essentially. She had only been paid $50 for the original photo shoot, and she only turned to that photo shoot because she had no money and she like desperately needed money. And then obviously when she like became super famous, that photo shoot was very sought out. And it was also the main reason for Playboy's success at the time, because that centerfold was like advertised on the front page. So all of that success, all of these like ideas around Playboy and the sexual liberation movement were honestly attributed to Marilyn Monroe, but she never even received like a thank you card or anything for that. In the book, Perry notes that both Hefner and Monroe were like icons of the sexual liberation movement, but they were also both icons of how it impacts men and women, like respectively. As Andrea Dworkin wrote about Marilyn Monroe later in Right-Wing Women, she grinned, she posed, she pretended she had affairs with famous and powerful men. A friend of hers claimed that she had so many illegal abortions wrongly performed that her reproductive organs were severely injured. She died alone, possibly acting on her own behalf for the first time. Her lovers in both flesh and fantasy had fucked her to death, and her apparent suicide stood at once as accusation and answer. No, Marilyn Monroe, the ideal sexual female, had not liked it. This is something we've heard a million times before, and guys, I kind of feel like a broken record here because I've said this a million times as well. But the idea that something is totally fine as long as a woman likes it, as long as she consents, just like wipes out any other potential morally bad things to do with it. We've heard it a million times. We've seen it in a million different cases and circumstances. Whether she actually likes it is not allowed to be questioned though. Because if we do question that, we're taking away a woman's autonomy, which, considering we haven't reached a point where women have autonomy in every aspect, that argument kind of falls flat because, girl, we don't have it in the first place. How am I going to take it away? Similarly, I mentioned in another episode, in the BDSM episode, one of the first porn movies that was ever shown in like mainstream cinemas, I think, it featured a woman who like supposedly loved being a porn actress, and it wasn't revealed until years later that she was a victim of coercion, rape, and domestic violence at the hands of her husband, who was also her manager. Again, with all of these other women as well, it's like we don't find out how they actually felt about this until years and years later. The same thing happened kind of similarly to Pamela Anderson as well. Obviously, love her. She's amazing. Love how she doesn't wear makeup. That's so cool. She was also seen as a sex icon. Anytime you would think of Pamela Anderson, it would be her like running across a beach or in Playboy magazine. In her 2023 documentary, she talked candidly about how her experiences of child sexual abuse, and also how she survived rape at age 12. This deeply affected her relationship with her body, and by being shot in Playboy, it kind of like helped her to probably not fix her relationship with her body, but be able to like celebrate her body and see that other people like loved her body too. And she said that she felt kind of like reconnected to herself, which is good, but it didn't really have a great effect. And that celebration of her was not loving, it was objectifying. And with the non-consensual release of her sex tape as well, we could see that her body was not seen as like something that belonged to her. It was seen as public property. And that was also seen through when she tried to take the release of her sex tape to court. All of the like arguments against her getting anything out of this at court was due to the fact that everyone already saw her as a whore who kind of consented to everything. Her consent to featuring in Playboy was taken as consent to any form of sexual abuse. Even when she like tried to take it to court and say that she didn't want that to be released because of the way that she was seen in the public eye, she was seen as public property. No one cared that she didn't want her body to be released in that way because she'd consented to it before, so it was totally fine. Today, she still doesn't want to be labeled a victim because she, like herself, still feels like she put herself in those scenarios, which kind of makes me feel bad because, like, she was a victim of this entire system that sets up women that way from childhood. And as we'll talk about later, how Andrea Dworkin labeled incest or child sexual abuse like the first betrayal of women and also the first thing that cuts off our connection to our own sexuality. On Twitter, many Sabrina Carpenter supporters, mostly gay men and white women. Do I need to say it? We're posting tweets along the lines of, you guys would have died seeing pop stars in the 2000s or the 90s. Or if Madonna was around today, she would be crucified. Failing to acknowledge that the Britney Spears that they're posting the videos of on stage had a very public nervous breakdown. Like, did you guys forget about that? They're like, oh my god, bring back like celebrities like Britney Spears. She was a minor on stage asking the audience to hit her baby one more time. Let's not bring that back. And even with other like child sort of actresses or child stars like Amanda Bynes, yeah, let's not bring that back. Or as well, even saying that like, oh, well, this artist did this in the 90s, so like, why are you guys angry now? Like, but what was groundbreaking in the 90s, in the less liberal 90s, I guess, is no longer groundbreaking today. And it's also ignoring the fact that feminists in the 90s were also probably like also critiquing this at the time. It's the same people critiquing it today as would have been critiquing it in the 90s. As opposed to these other celebrities as well, especially like Britney Spears, who was a minor, who was forced into having an abortion and all these other things. Sabrina Carpenter does have a choice. And she does have autonomy. When you're comparing it to these other women who were under like abusive record labels and things like that, to engage in the same sexualized practices that were forced onto or either killed off or made crazy all of the blonde sex icons before her, it's a complete disregard for those women's lives and their lack of autonomy. Because you do have a choice. They probably didn't. Her fans ensuring us that it's actually irony and she's making fun of how everyone sees her and treats her, when unlike the blonde bombshells that came before her, she has chosen that branding for herself, and she chose it because whether her or her marketing team know that like sex sells, and that's what they're monetizing off. Being a supposed like misandrist man hater is one of the most normal ideals of how women are supposed to act. I mean, think of like wives who are like the old ball and chain, complaining about her useless husband who doesn't do anything, he's useless, like he doesn't know how to clean or cook. Isn't that the same as calling him a man-child? Yet still dating him anyway. A feminist action is refusing to marry or date a useless man at all. I mean, fuck you, Barry Keoghan, but like, it's not feminist to continuously complain about men, but then continuously engage with them. Similar to the idea of women secretly desiring rape and sexual violence against them, and how this has been used to inflict it against them for many, many years. The idea of children being secretly sexually knowing and seductive has also been used to justify child sexual assault for a long, long time. And when we look at Sabrina Carpenter's brand, her like sexy baby aesthetic is really obvious, and should have been obvious to people since the release of Short and Sweet. This is also what I think sets Sabrina Carpenter apart from like these other celebrities that she kind of gets compared to. Comparing her to artists such as Madonna, Britney Spears, or even Olivia Rodrigo is missing the part where they don't / aren't typically eroticizing their own childlike nature. Maybe Britney Spears was, but she was a minor when she was like releasing a lot of her greatest hits. So I don't think that's a really good comparison, as I've already talked about. In a late 2024 article by Jade Hurley, she discusses the post-COVID return to childhood amongst young adult women. The article is titled, "Your Fave is Selling a Pedophilic Fantasy." Typically white women, the pink Lululemon set wearing, Pop Mart toy collecting, girl math doing demographic. She writes, youth and innocence, especially post-lockdown, provide adult women social status while endangering the youth we emulate. The line between girl and woman is being blurred, and it's women, not girls, who benefit from this exchange. We're going to go more into this in a moment, but Hurley notes that while Sabrina's content is maturing, her aesthetic is kind of, her like packaging, her aesthetic is regressing. While her music has become increasingly sexual and for an adult audience, and also while she herself has got older, her marketing and aesthetic has become more and more childlike, more and more 1950s, more and more like pastel pink, pastel blue, hearts and glitter. And realistically, her aesthetic has become more pedophilic. Hurley writes, intentional or not, this branding decision offers audiences the choice of pedophilic fantasy. Knowing American culture, by and large, they will take it. I recently finished reading the book Rocking the Cradle of Sexual Politics by Louise Armstrong, which discusses in depth the period of time when radical feminists began, well, in America specifically, which is like arguably the most pedophilic culture in the world, began to make the connection between women's rights and incest. And also, the subtitle of this book is What Happened When Women Said Incest. It's kind of like a historical briefing of when incest was kind of, when people started realizing how big of a problem incest was, when Freud started making his theories, how there was kind of like an outcry about it at the time. But then it kind of came back again, and people started just assuming that children were lying. And once again, the patriarchy took hold and started giving men much more value in court. Incest is effectively the cradle of sexual politics. The abuse of children is what upholds the abuse of adult women. And seeing women as smaller, more stupid, more delicate versions of men ties into that, i.e. seeing women as children. Armstrong also discusses Freud's views on child sexual assault. As you probably know, Freud's views on child sexual assault were kind of strange, and his theories on like child-parent relationships as well. However, when he first started doing research on the subject, he was kind of on the right track. So many children were coming forward with allegations against like their fathers assaulting them. So many, in fact, that he and his peers in psychological fields kind of assumed that they were all lying and there was something wrong with them. This is what spawned his theories about penile envy and a child's sexual attraction to their opposite gender parent. He assumed that because so many of them were coming forward, they were actually had some like weird sexual infatuation with their parents. And these theories were somehow more widely accepted than the very obvious fact that the nuclear family and patriarchy, again, the cradle of that is incest. And that is why it occurs so often. These children weren't lying. Armstrong's book discusses multiple cases of incest wherein there is proof of penetration. The child is living in fear and has so many psychological impacts. Mother is like desperately trying to remove the husband from her child's life, and the father is still afforded visitation rights. Or worse, afforded compulsory unsupervised time with the children. Or again, in even more extreme cases, given sole custody. And there are so many cases like this. The idea that women actually under the law are like more likely to be supported when it comes to family matters is like a complete lie. Every law system as well is built or informed by patriarchy. And all of this again is due to the distrusting and hatred of women, which is substantiated by the hatred of children and how the abuse of children is used in order to harm women. A lot of the cases that she talked about, the father would like hate his wife and he would take that out on the child. Or if she started refusing sex to him, he would take it from the child and be like, well, it's your fault, you started refusing me. In 1971, at a Rape Crisis Conference, Florence Rush gave a speech that introduced the idea of the Freudian cover-up. She was one of the first to challenge Freudian theories of children as the seducers rather than the victims of adults who were exploiting their power over children. Rush had a few important points. One, the sexual abuse of children who are overwhelmingly female by sexual offenders who are overwhelmingly male is part and parcel of the male-dominated society which overtly and covertly subjugates women. Two, that the sexual molestation and abuse of female children is not regarded seriously, is winked at, rationalized, and allowed to continue through a complex of customs and mores which applauds the male's sexual aggression and denies the female's pain, humiliation, and outrage. And three, that sexual abuse of children is permitted because it is an unspoken but prominent factor in socializing and preparing the female to accept a subordinate role, to feel guilty, ashamed, and to tolerate through fear the power exercised over her by men, that the female's early sexual experiences prepare her to submit in later life to the adult forms of sexual abuse heaped on her by her boyfriend, her lover, and her husband. In short, the sexual abuse of female children is a process of education which prepares them to become the wives and mothers of America. Back to Sabrina Carpenter. Again, we can apply the sexualization of petiteness, hairlessness, like with her nonsense outro where she was like, I'll take you to a place that has no hair, and baby pink to the patriarchy's foundation of child sexual abuse. And it's obvious when we know that women are oftentimes the foot soldiers continuously upholding the patriarchy, that they are also more than capable of upholding the sexualization of children too. When Carpenter was offered a Skims campaign in early 2024, its target audience was very clearly Gen Z. Though, as Hurley notes in her essay, Skims typically has a customer base that is overwhelmingly millennial or older. This campaign was kind of more Brandy Melville-esque, with coquette bows, baby doll dresses, and most pedophilically, by Sabrina's own admission, the backdrop of a young girl's bedroom. I don't know if what Kim Kardashian was trying to do with this was to increase her customer base, but it's pretty obvious that recently the Gen Z kind of return to childlike nature, which again could be because of the feeling of losing their childhood after COVID. I think that is what she was trying to appeal to, but in doing so, it was appealing to the sexualization of children as well. Hurley writes, the Skims and Sabrina Carpenter machines are selling our own obsession with youth sexuality back to us and telling us it's empowering. In fact, it's just feminine. Don't believe us? Listen to what Sabrina said about her Skims experience. 1, I love the femininity of the whole creative. Or 2, it is precious to see women feel like women, and in a way that feels very unapologetically feminine. Does that sound right-wing to you? Once again, let's go back to the very basic, very, very basic idea that there is no healthy femininity or healthy masculinity. Femininity is inherently about submission and masculinity is inherently about dominance. They cannot be changed into positive things. And what else is femininity? Let's say it together. Apparently being white and likening yourself to a child. Perhaps this also entwines with other beauty ideals, such as botulinum toxin, eating disorders and Pilates builds, tanning or skin bleaching, depending on where you live in the world, men almost always only liking shorter women. The thinner, younger, and wider you are, the more the patriarchy will reward you. The more you're able to appeal to a pedophilic fantasy, the more the patriarchy will reward you. What is similar about Marilyn Monroe, Pamela Anderson, Britney Spears, and Sabrina Carpenter is not how sexually liberated they were and how in touch with their sexuality they were. It's their ability to even present themselves that way in the first place, which is allowed because of their whiteness and also their blondness, which kind of sounds a bit like eugenicist when I say it. White and blonde. Who else like that? But they're portrayed in a way that women of color could never be. And with that history, and Sabrina Carpenter likening herself to these like earlier blonde bombshells and effectively these abused women of the past, and voluntarily using the same sexuality that hurt them is insensitive, but it also like is a complete like lack of empathy for these women's lives as well. Hurley writes, teen girlhood today, while the subject of media fascination and romance, is an existence rife with danger. This is in combination with statistics regarding the sexual abuse of children and teenagers in America. For example, 1 in 6 American girls in elementary and secondary school have experienced sexual harassment, or girls between 16 and 19 being 4 times more likely than the general population to experience sexual violence. A lot of this, of course, has to do with the increasing influence of porn, which continuously gets worse and sees absolutely no sign of stopping. But it is also specifically associated with America's culture of Puritanism. And I guess that comes from the fact that then they still are a very like conservative Christian country. Without unpacking that Puritanism and then attempting to have a sexual liberation movement, very clearly didn't work. It's showing nowadays how Puritanism and overt sexualization are different sides of the same coin. When American culture, which yes, has spread to pretty much every single Western country in the world, simultaneously wants a pure woman and a whore, child sexual assault increases. Between 2005 and 2019, the number of child sexual abuse material producers sentenced increased by 422%. And who bears the brunt of this sexualization, of childlike seduction, of Puritanism, but at the same time, sexualization? Young girls. Children, but especially young girls, who are also increasingly producing their own child porn as the forced sexualization of their existence takes hold. And as it is being increasingly, especially recently, emulated by the Sabrina Carpenters of the world, they continuously repackage and encourage their own exploitation, or rather, our own exploitation. When like young girls think it's cool and sexually liberated to start posting naked pictures of themselves online, I think at that moment we can all agree that the sexual liberation movement failed. But can these women really be blamed? To fall victim to a pedophilic and degrading sexual liberation movement that only ever had the interests of the Hugh Hefners of the world in mind is exactly what is expected under a very much still functioning patriarchy that oppresses women and children alike. But Sabrina Carpenter hasn't always been this way. There's also a reason why she turned to this sexualized image herself, or rather her brand hasn't always been that way. In like 2020, when Olivia Rodrigo released her debut album and had mentions of a blonde girl who her ex-boyfriend Joshua Bassett betrayed her for, Sabrina was labeled a homewrecker, a slut. I literally, I wrote that in my script and then I forgot that those are like the lyrics to the song that she wrote in reply. I'm a homewrecker, I'm a slut. Death threats, filling up semi-trucks. I don't know if they're lyrics. That is from the song Because I Liked a Boy, I think. And then her other song, Skin, as well, was also released at that time, which detail how the internet swiftly turned against her after Rodrigo released her songs, which it seems partially she blamed Olivia Rodrigo for. After these events, I guess she kind of ran with the branding that was given to her, the slut. She started using sex to sell her music, which might not even have been a decision of hers, but like her marketing team probably noticed that that's how everyone saw her now, so why not take advantage of it? But Sabrina Carpenter is not stupid, which I think is clear by her wit, her songwriting, and how she has used the internet, like labeling her this way to her advantage. But honestly, that makes how she markets herself even worse. To have the ability and intelligence to understand feminist critique of how your marketing and aesthetic is and is going to hurt women and children, and yet continuously eroticizing your own subordination is kind of a slap in the face to all of the women who have rightfully questioned her antics. And similarly, to argue that she doesn't know exactly what she's doing, or like her marketing team is just doing it for her, takes away more of her autonomy than arguing that she knows exactly what she's doing. As I mentioned, and kind of what inspired this whole episode, her alternate album covers that were inspired by that picture of Marilyn Monroe. In posting those, she added a comment that these new covers were supposedly approved by God, once again signifying that the only people who hate her are religious conservatives. This actually couldn't be further from the truth, because I hate all religions. Yeah, all religions. All of them. There isn't one that I don't hate. And God himself, I hate him too. Am I going to get struck by lightning? And God also loves submissive women. Who do you think the Puritanism in America was based after? Christianity. And the sexual liberation movement, in response to the expected Puritanism of women, just falling back on those same submissive tropes, saying things like, God forbid a woman be submissive, God forbid a woman express her sexuality, and then it's just being submissive to a man, which was literally what we were trying to fight against with the sexual liberation movement, the expected submission of women, and that being the only way that they're allowed to be sexual. God is not forbidding that. He wrote that. Who do you think invented that? God and Christianity. To call a woman a slut or a prude is the exact same sentence. And when we look at the treatment of Sabrina Carpenter for her supposed like home-wrecking actions with Olivia Rodrigo, to turn around herself and then call the women who are questioning her religious, sexless conservatives is hypocrisy. Men have never, ever wanted women to not desire sex. They have wanted women to desire it in the way they constructed. Whether that's through religious Puritanism, which allows women to only desire sex for reproduction, or whether it's through pornographic sex, violence, and power dynamics. It's the same thing. Neither of them are forward-thinking, progressive, or feminist in any way. As Andrea Dworkin said, the right attitude is to want it. The right attitude is to desire men because they engage in phallic penetration. The right attitude is not to be selfish, especially about orgasm. This prohibits a sexuality for women outside the boundaries of male dominance. This makes any women-centered sexuality impossible. What it does make possible is a woman's continued existence within a system in which men can control the valuation of her existence as an individual. This valuation is based on her sexual conformity within a sexual system based on his right to possess her. Regardless of if you're a trad wife, or regardless of if you're a dominatrix, that is your existence within a sexual system, which is created to cater to men. There was a creator on TikTok who made a video saying like, the Sabrina Carpenter criticizers would not survive her house full of vintage Playboy cutout pictures. It's not a brag to make aesthetic the suffering under glorified pimp Hugh Hefner, but it's not surprising that while thankfully most major journalist outlets have published articles in the last decade ensuring that no, Hugh Hefner didn't love women, no, Hugh Hefner was not a feminist, there are still some that argue for Hefner's supposed pushing forward of feminism. The pushing forward in question refers to Hefner's stance on abortion and contraception. And what this relates to specifically is kind of the idea that people can support things for different reasons. Actual religious conservatives are against the expression of female sexuality because they don't think women should be sexual outside of reproduction or outside of the bedroom with their one husband that they're not allowed to divorce and who is allowed to beat them. Radical feminists are against this expression of female sexuality because it is degrading and because it is based on the wants of men. In this case, Hugh Hefner's pro-abortion, pro-contraception stance was not because he cared about women's well-being or their ability to choose their own destiny. When fear of pregnancy is the last remaining reason a woman has, or the last remaining valid to him probably, reason a woman has for denying sex. Is it not obvious sex mogul Hugh Hefner is going to find a way to turn that no into a yes? Marilyn Monroe died a decade before the pill was legal for unmarried women, and Playboy magazine existed for 20 years before abortion was legal in all American states, which is crazy because it's not legal anymore. Contraception is what allowed the sexual liberation movement to kind of begin and to thrive, and that's what it was built on. But Hugh Hefner's decoupling of reproduction from sex was not so women would have the freedom to engage in it however they wanted. It was so women could no longer use that as an excuse to not engage in something that potentially they didn't want to engage in. It's just definitely not a coincidence that the sexual liberation movement and contraception arrived at the same time. And that's not to say that contraception is a bad thing at all. It afforded many women the right to choose whether or not to be pregnant, but there are different reasons for different people supporting contraception. Speaking of, as well, I've seen some comparisons from Sabrina Carpenter and Olivia Rodrigo's live shows, particularly a video of Olivia Rodrigo at like a festival. I don't remember which one it was, maybe like Lollapalooza, where she literally like turned around and like slightly was shaking her ass for like 1 second on stage, and people were like, oh my god, the Sabrina Carpenter criticizers would hate Olivia Rodrigo if they saw this. Sorry, I don't think just like dancing on stage versus being into like pet play, being submissive, eroticizing sexual violence, pretending to be Eiffel Towered on stage, I don't think they're the same thing. But after all of this, after we're so deep into the sexual liberation movement, with all its mistakes and all of its focus on men's pleasure, Louise Perry asks, but then what else can liberal feminists advise? They have made the error of buying into an ideology that has always best served the likes of Hugh Hefner and Harvey Weinstein, his true heir. And from this, they derive the false belief that women are still suffering only because of the sexual liberation project of the 1960s being unfinished, rather than because it was always inherently flawed. Thus, they prescribe more and more freedom and are continuously surprised when their prescription doesn't cure the disease. In an age where our only education about sex is that consent is a fix-all for all sexual malaise, liberals arguing that the real problem is that we should just teach men not to rape falls flat. When depictions of gender, sex, and gendered sex in any and every single form of media teaches men to rape, just teaching them not to in school is not going to counteract that. That's also why it's my belief that women should refrain from any kind of relationship with men who are misogynistic beyond re-education, which is sadly a lot of them. Of course, all men have a level of misogyny, but if they don't listen to you and completely understand feminism, why you would talk to, or worse, sleep with or date them is beyond me. Until men are forced to change their ways in order to have relationships, platonic or otherwise, with women, they will continue acting the way they do. In Right-Wing Women, Dworkin discusses the idea of sexual intelligence. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, a concept that women have been disallowed from learning because sexual oppression is like so widespread and one of the main things that women have been unable to free themselves from. She defines it as a human capacity for discerning, manifesting, and constructing sexual integrity, most similar to moral intelligence and just generally the human ability to have morals, and how no, this shouldn't suddenly disappear when discussing sex. As I've said a million times, if your morals don't apply in every situation, then they're not your morals. You can't supposedly be against sexual violence, but then defend it when the woman is consenting. You're not against sexual violence. She goes on further to say, sexual intelligence in women, that rarest intelligence in a male supremacist world, is necessarily a revolutionary intelligence. The opposite of the pornographic, which simply reiterates the world as it is for women. The opposite of the will to be used. The opposite of masochism and self-hatred. The opposite of good woman and bad woman, both. It is not in being a whore that a woman becomes an outlaw in this man's world. It is in the possession of herself, the ownership and effective control of her own body, her separateness and distinctness, the integrity of her body as hers, not his. It's also important to mention, again, I think I talked about it before as well, but that Dworkin has said multiple times that incest or child sexual assault is the first betrayal of a woman, the first abuse against a woman that severs her connection to her body, connection to herself, and her sexuality. And it sets her up to be unable to develop that necessary sexual intelligence that many women still to this day are unable to even begin to understand. I'd say right now what is destroying it even more commonly than incest, I feel like young girls' sexuality is being destroyed by early exposure to porn, or even being around boys who have been exposed to it. But when you're a young girl and you're watching videos of yourself being forced into submission, and everywhere around you that is also what you're being taught, that's not a choice that you're making later in life to then be submissive to a man. That has been forced onto you for like decades. That's not a choice that you're making. And that's why choice feminism also doesn't make any sense, because it's not a choice to be submissive. It's not a choice to act in line with the patriarchy. It's oppression. There's also a longer quote that Dworkin wrote regarding sexual intelligence. She says, "Sexual intelligence, like moral intelligence, would have to confront the great issues of cruelty and tenderness. But where moral intelligence must tangle with questions of right and wrong, sexual intelligence would have to tangle with questions of dominance and submission. One preordained to be fucked has no need to exercise sexual intelligence, no opportunity to exercise it, no argument that justified exercising it. To keep the women sexually acquiescent, the capacity for sexual intelligence must be prohibited to her. And it is. Her clitoris is denied, her capacity for pleasure is distorted and defamed. Her erotic values are slandered and insulted. Her desire to value her body as her own is paralyzed and maimed. She is turned into an occasion for male pleasure, an object of male desire, a thing to be used, and any willful expression of her sexuality in the world unmediated by men or male values is punished. She is used as a slut or as a lady, but sexual intelligence cannot manifest in a human being whose predestined purpose is to be exploited through sex by sex as sex. Sexual intelligence constructs as its own use. It begins with a whole body, not one that has already been cut into parts and fetishized. It begins with self-respecting body, not one that is characterized by class as dirty, wanton, and slavish. It acts in the world, a world it enters on its own with freedom as well as with passion." But as she said as well, it's almost impossible for women to become sexually intelligent. It's impossible for women to connect to their own sexuality. When everything around them teaches them exactly how to be, how can you even discover what you actually want, or like what you would actually choose without the influence of everything around you? I guess to conclude here, is the possibility, or is female sexuality, is it even possible for it to be a choice? With the increasing like pornification of our culture and the expectations put on women to be both virgin and whore, shout out Freud again. Is it even possible for real female sexuality to blossom? Shout out Bob Catter. Let 1,000 blossoms be bloom, but I ain't spending any more time on it. When a woman's sexual intelligence is murdered since childhood, how do we step away and heal from that? Particularly when we have class traders arguing for women's right to be submissive. What world are you living in? Honestly, like female separatism, and I guess, even though I'm not the biggest fan of the like term, but like decentering men is honestly the only like temporary perhaps, but only solution I can think of. When women refuse to engage with men who hate us, who sexualize us, who abuse us, the theory is that eventually they'll be forced to change to even be able to have relationships with women. Regardless of if that ever happens, mainly because I don't think we have the years left on Earth to be able to reach that. Guys, we might all die by 2030, so regardless of if that affects how men act or not. Female separatism literally just helps women to be happier and more free from abuse. I mean, I'm glad I've seen multiple women online recently who have like discussed their own experiences with breaking away from male ideals and I guess like male-centeredness as well, and how they have also been able to rediscover their own sexualities this way. Again, it's almost impossible to discover it completely void of all of these influences, but to the best of their ability. Similarly, one user at I'ma order the mahi mahi, I don't know what that means, but that's her user, made a TikTok discussing how all of her sexual violence or abuse-based kinks pretty much just disappeared as soon as she started becoming less male-centered and learning about feminism as well. And I've received a lot of comments like that too. That is genuinely the only way we can fight against it. But unfortunately, there's many women who are still defending a woman's right to be submissive, so it is difficult to do. I think that's all I have to discuss in this episode. Also, I should probably say, I don't know how often I'm going to be posting these because I'm starting a master's degree at the end of this month, so I'm probably going to have literally zero free time at all. But thank you guys so much for listening. Anyway, I'm sure I'll see you at some point. I don't know when. Thank you for listening. Bye.